That switch, that change of perception from things that are just continually happening, unfortunately, and I'm the victim of it, to using life and its continual opportunities to wake up and to dig deeper into the true nature of self and reality. That what you spoke to in this constant arising and passing away of phenomena that we all experience in life on a moment-to-moment basis, that life is truly impermanent, and that our continual denial and resistance to that flow of change is why we suffer. And I feel like the more that you actually lose that identification with you being the person that things are happening to, then you can become like that witness and observer, somebody watching the TV, right? And you're not as absorbed in the experience and that controlling the way and you needing to force the movie in a certain outcome, right? So I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about impermanence, our denial with it, how that causes suffering, and then also your thoughts on the Buddhist view of consciousness and self, versus like no self, versus perhaps the Vedantic view of consciousness as self. And is that a little too woo-woo for you, or what are your thoughts there as well?
Yeah, well, so impermanence is really the central fact that we have to get our heads around to be motivated to look into any of these esoteric ideas, right? Because for impermanence, experience could be perfect, right? Like you could figure, at least in principle, you could figure out how to arrange your life. You know, you could become wealthy enough and healthy enough and kind enough and have enough, good friends who love you around you. You could be careful enough. You could maintain it all enough so that your well-being would be truly invulnerable, right? Like it's just that you could create a kind of paradise for yourself. But there's a problem with that. In the grossest sense, the problem is death, right? We all die. Even if you're the luckiest one in the world and you're going to be healthy to 130, what is that synonymous with? That's synonymous with you being on the receiving end of lots of phone calls, learning that people close to you have died and disappeared, right? So you're going to lose everyone you love if you're too lucky to be the healthiest person you know, right? Nothing lasts, right? That is the problem. That no matter how good experience gets, anything that wasn't here a moment ago and it suddenly appears, any state of mind that wasn't here a moment ago and suddenly appears, joy and, creative fulfillment and love and ecstasy and rapture. I mean, any drug experience or non-drug experience, any psychedelic, insight or insight had any other way, if it wasn't there a moment ago and it's here now, by definition, it will disappear, right? And so a durable form of well-being can't be predicated on the appearance of any change in the contents of consciousness, because nothing lasts, right? What you will be left with, by definition, is a memory of that experience. And rehearsing that memory is itself a transitory experience that you can only extract so much joy from. I mean, you can think about how good that party was a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, but your thoughts about it are not as good as the party, and your thoughts about it are not that good when you've, on the 100th reiteration, right? It's just not, and so it is with any spiritual insight that is a matter of something you're remembering, some peak experience you had yesterday, whether you were, on a meditation retreat or on acid or whatever it was. If it was a change in state and now you're thinking about it, it's a memory, right? So the ground truth of our contemplative lives has to be what is available to be noticed now, or like what you really have is what you can locate now. And if you, this will frustrate many people, because many people are living, understandably, with the experience that now is kind of mediocre. It's not, they can't locate anything especially profound now, but they have had some great experiences that they can remember and that they're using as kind of landmarks on their spiritual journey, what they want to get back to, right? So they did take MDMA, a year ago, and that was completely transformative, and they recognized a state of consciousness that they previously had no clue existed, and they now know that their life's journey is completely different than they had assumed. But it's still a memory, right? They don't feel that way now, right? Life isn't that good now. And so if you're, again, most people are in that situation in some sense. Most people are seeking happiness, seeking insight, seeking fulfillment, seeking some stable basis of feeling good in a context in which everything is changing, right? And there's just no way to secure an experience that is so good that it becomes truly indelible and it becomes the person you now are, moment by moment, thereafter. What is ever present, what is there always to be noticed, is consciousness. Is just the sheer fact that it feels like something to be what you are, to be aware of experience, to be awake, even in the dream state, potentially even in states of sleep between dreams. I mean, some of us have had experiences where we think we know from the first person side that sleep itself is not synonymous with a loss of consciousness, but that's a fairly esoteric claim scientifically. But in any case, in normal waking life and even in dreams, there is the sheer fact that it's like something to be what you are, and that is consciousness, for lack of a better term. I mean, I would also call that awareness, and it is always the ground truth of your living and caring about anything. I mean, there's nothing you can value outside of its potential implications for consciousness. Whether it's your consciousness or the consciousness of those you care about, or of the consciousnesses of perfect strangers who you'll never meet. If you care about the difference between happiness and suffering in this universe, your own or your children's or strangers, as you are right to do, and really all of our morality and ethics is based on that kind of caring. What you're talking about is consciousness and its contents. You're talking about the character of experience for conscious beings. And so consciousness is the basis of all experience, and it does have a certain character that can be recognized. And its character is, in the Buddha sense, it is selflessness. It is another term which is profoundly misleading in English. It's often used in Buddhism is emptiness. Right? The Sanskrit is shunyata. Now, emptiness is a kind of a depressing term. I mean, people they tend not to want more of it. More of it when they hear about it. It's like, why would I want the punchline of spiritual life to be emptiness? Right? That just sounds like the most boring, depressing thing in the world. But it's not certainly not meant to be, and it's not when you see its implications. I mean, it has implications of freedom and lack of contrivance and lack of its centerlessness, and it's unconstrained. It's unborn is another word that comes up in Buddhism. Uncontaminated, and it's not constructed of anything. It's not built on anything. It's not predicated. It's not contingent. It doesn't require any specific contents of consciousness to be real, right? It's the prior reality of the fact that anything is happening at all, subjectively speaking. And when you recognize that reality and you recognize that you are identical to it as a matter of experience, there is real freedom even in the midst of classically negative experience, even in the midst of physical pain, even in the midst of profoundly negative thoughts. Profoundly negative thoughts recognized are like, very ugly images, on a movie screen. They just don't hurt the screen, right? Or very ugly things, held up in front of a mirror. The mirror doesn't contract. The mirror doesn't recoil from ugly images, right? The mirror is just this condition in which anything can kind of effortlessly appear. And consciousness can be recognized to be that way. And so from the Buddha side, just linguistically, they tend to emphasize what it's not. It's not a self. It's not compounded. It's not conditional. It's not constructed. And so there's just this sort of this negative effort of sort of disavowing any assumption about what it is, right, and not reifying it, not making something of it. Whereas on the Advaita side, coming from an Indian tradition that is just filled to bursting with sort of positive assertions of religiosity. I mean, just the kind of the Hindu context in which Advaita Vedanta is the ultimate expression of wisdom. There's just a lot of assertion about spiritual reality and a lot of metaphysics. So Buddhism traditionally is a reaction against all of that, and it tends to maintain this reaction even against some of the language that is used in Advaita. The main indiscretion being, capital S self, right? Like the punchline for Advaita is, you are the self. You're not the little self. You're the big self. Right. But I'm convinced that they're talking about the same experience. Ultimately, they're just asserting different things about it. And here we're up against the limitations of language. I think there's a danger with both ways of talking about it. I mean, in the Buddhist framing, the danger is it becomes so dry and analytical that people get the wrong idea. They think that there's something kind of life canceling about this whole project, right? This is like, it's no self. Nirvana is the extinguishing of suffering, but it's the kind of the extinguishing of everything else. You're losing your identity. Life is this is often it's a very current mistranslation, but most people think the Buddha said life is suffering, right? Like it's all suffering. There's no happiness, right? That's not what the Pali term dukkha means, but it includes suffering. But the basic meaning is unsatisfactoriness, very, very much because of what I just said about the implications of impermanence, right? Like because everything is changing, there's nothing you can successfully hold on to. That is unsatisfactory. If you're seeking a permanent state of satisfaction, you're not going to find it here because everything is changing, right? And you amid that change, if you think your happiness depends on gratifying desire, getting the next thing you want, you are engaged by definition in a ceaseless search for gratification. I mean, you have to keep building the house anew every day, right? Because it's all the walls are always falling down, right? There's just a continuous project of maintenance, and that's true of our world. I mean, we're continually maintaining the kind of the material requisites of our well-being, but the question is, what are we doing with our attention moment by moment while we do that? And once you learn to meditate, you can recognize that it's actually possible to be happy before the next good thing happens, right? Before you solve the problem that has just appeared. So before you got rid of the next negative thing that has happened, right? So you have a pain and you have to figure out, okay, now what am I going to do about it? Well, do I have to call a doctor? Okay, this is bad enough. It's not going away. I don't know what it is. I'm going to call a doctor, right? At each stage along the way, there's an opportunity to either be at rest and just simply do the next thing from the point of view of already being okay, psychologically and spiritually, contemplatively, or you can be thrust into this dreamscape of one anxious thought following the next, thinking about the past and future, and feeling at each moment along the way that your well-being is entirely dependent on resolving this situation, right? Like you're not going to be okay until this pain is gone, until you have figured out what it is, you've seen the necessary doctor, and now it's gone, right? It's no possibility of being okay until you have solved that problem. And so it is with desire. Like you have now figured out the next thing you want. You're not going to be okay until you get that thing, right? Because the feeling of desire itself is a kind of discomfort, right? Like you recognize that, okay, you've got a problem. You've got a problem in your life that can only be filled by a certain shaped object, right? And until you figure out how to get united with that object, whether it's a relationship or a change in your business or a change in your health or an understanding of what's happening in the world. You know, you're living with a mental state in the presence of which you're sufficiently uncomfortable that you have to rearrange the world so as to get rid of that state. Meditation allows you to recognize that consciousness is already free and open and without center, even in the presence of that mental state. And the thought you were just thinking that delivered that state itself was just an appearance that was, happening all by itself. And you break the spell and you recognize, okay, now you're at rest. It's not to say that there's nothing that needs to be done. You might still have a pain that you should go to a doctor for. You might still have a business problem you need to solve, but you can do it from a state of being that recognizes we're all going to die, right? Like your well-being can't be predicated. I mean, winning this game can't be a matter of not dying. It can't be a matter of not having pains. It can't be a matter of not having business problems that you have to solve, right? Like it's like you're playing a video game where there are various boss fights and there are various challenges, and at every level it's interesting and complicated, and it's always something new appearing. I mean, what did you expect? Were you expecting a video game where nothing new appeared? Like you're expecting a place in the game where it's just smooth sailing without any impediment, and you just get to stay there, right? Like it's just that's just not the game we're in.
What a boring game.
Yeah, it would be boring, and it's. The truth is there are kind of meditative equivalents of that where you can get. The truth is, you can become a monk or a nun, right? You can become a monastic where all you do every hour of the day is meditate. And so you have no business problems, you have no relationship problems, you have no kids, you have you have health problems, but you've limited the things that are on the menu to worry about. You're not going to be political, you're not going to worry about what's happening, in the news. You have absented yourself from any conversation that requires you to add your voice to the complications of the world. And now you're just going to pay attention to the contents of consciousness and meditate. There's a way to, I'm not criticizing that project. I spent a fair amount of time on silent meditation retreats doing just that. So it was, I know what that life is like, at least for increments as long as 3 months at a time. But it's possible to engage all of that very much like trying to smooth out the video game to the point where it is boring but ecstatic, right? It's not really boring because boredom as a state is really just our failure to pay attention to. Like the ordinary state of boredom that most people are familiar with is just nothing interesting or good enough is happening to capture your attention, and you don't know how to meditate, so you're waiting for something good to happen to capture your attention. You're scrolling for something that's going to give you a hit, of dopamine, or you're changing the channels, looking for something that you can disappear into because you're uncomfortable enough in your own skin. You can't just stare at a wall and be happy. Whereas when you know how to meditate, you actually can just stare at a wall and be happy. There's just the mystery of your own being there just as available when you're looking at a wall. So a monk or a nun, they won't have that problem. But what they can have is the availability of a very different project, which is universally condemned in contemplative circles as a kind of error, but it's a very pleasurable and arcane error, which is to become a kind of junkie of concentration, where the concentrated mind is incredibly pleasurable, right? So it's just, and you can be explicitly concentrated in states of mind like loving kindness, where you're just overwhelmed by feelings of love and compassion for all sentient beings, right? And you can just be sort of cruising in that stream for as long as you maintain that practice. So you could just be blissed out on meditation. And, it's not that it's a bad thing. It's not that it's necessarily a misuse of a person's life. Because if that person is functioning in the world at all and meeting other people or teaching meditation to people, that can be one of the most inspiring people you're ever going to meet. You meet someone who's doing nothing but meditate on loving kindness, it's just, you can get just blissed out just hanging out with that person,
Yeah.
because all they're thinking is how much they love you and how much they want you to be well, and they're not thinking about their career, they're not thinking about their relationship, they're not thinking about anything, and other than they're just pushing their good vibes out to the universe.
And that's real. That's felt.
That's very real, and they're very stoned. I mean, they're in a very good way,
High on their own supply.
Yeah, but there are two things wrong with this. One is it's also impermanent, right? Like it is, those high states of concentration are based on this very contingent effort to pay attention to a very specific thing to the exclusion of everything else, right? You're not available to everything else. You are meditating on something very specific. And you're also, you can fail to recognize that the real freedom of emptiness, the real freedom of non-duality, the real freedom of selflessness is just as available in ordinary states of consciousness as it is in this very rarefied state of just unconditional love for all sentient beings, right? So the ultimate wisdom of meditation, and again, both in the Buddhist tradition and in the Indian Advaitic one, is to recognize what consciousness is like, always and already coincident with every possible experience, not just the classically spiritual states of mind.